Okay, so today we're going to build on the calculator. We watched the calculator video, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes, on yesterday, right? This is mobile app. Sorry. We're going to build on the things that we have done slash are doing in WebDev 2. Okay. So what I would like for you to do after we watch these videos is we're going to take the calculator that we made or are making, the the arena RPG game thing that I assigned. Okay, so if you haven't done that, you'll need to do it. And we're going to use media queries and Flexbox to make them to where they are responsive and they look good regardless of our screen size. Okay, because we're going to take that knowledge on Friday and we're going to start applying it to Chowking. So here is what I would recommend that you do. I would recommend that you get anything from WebDev 2 pulled up, which is to say anything related to the calculator and anything related to that arena game, and have them ready to go. So after we finish these videos, we will be able to start working on them. Where there's not a ton of lecture stuff today because I want to give you plenty of time to work on this because I really want to start getting a good build going of our mobile app. One other thing, the first 3 videos we're going to watch literally cover the exact same subject matter. Okay? The reason I'm doing that is because I keep saying repetition, 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 repetition. I want you to hear 3 different people give you the same information 3 different ways effectively, so that in addition to seeing different perspectives, hopefully we'll also drill it into your skull so that you remember it going forward. So without further ado, let's hop over here and let's watch our first video here on media queries for responsive design.
CSS media queries aren't that hard to do, and they help when you're trying to do things like responsive design. I'm going to give you an introduction into how to use CSS media queries, as well as how to get started using different breakpoints and viewports and what they are. Here's the responsive design we'll be working on today. The techniques that I'll go over, as well as the implementation, are the same that I use for real-world businesses for hundreds of sites I've already built. Let's create our very first media query. To start us off, I've got a basic HTML page here with some CSS. It's got a logo with a navigation, hero image, feature items, and some columns. To create our very first media query, we'll run @media, and we'll put in a media type. In this case, we'll put in screen. We'll change the background style to white. This will immediately apply because we are running on a screen. We could change this media type to say print. If we do this, then the media type won't apply right now. But if we were to select file and print, then we would see that the background is white. This is very useful if you want to apply different styling for people who want to do a print screen. But in this case, we'll just use screen. If we want to create a second property requirement to apply this media call, we simply call and put in a second property. In this case, we might want something like min width. When we put this in and say select 480 pixels, we'll see that the styling immediately applies. This essentially is checking if the screen is larger than 480 pixels and applies the styling that we've set. In this case, we might change this to max. If we change this to max, the styling will only apply if the width of the page is smaller than 480 pixels. In this case, it's about 900 pixels. So this will only take effect if we put something in like 1200 pixels. Now we can see that the styling has applied. Another thing we can do is put in another and variable. In this case, we could put in min width of maybe 768 pixels. When we do this, the styling will only apply if the screen is both smaller than 1200 pixels but larger than 768 pixels. So if we resize this to be a bit bigger, we can see it loses styling. But if we resize it to be smaller and smaller and smaller, again, it'll lose the styling when it gets smaller than 768 pixels. It's a useful way if you want a select range for your responsive design. Now, if you're still with me, my name's Adrian, and if you like this kind of content and want to see more like it, hit like and subscribe, and let's just jump back into it. Now that we understand how media queries work, let's take a look at viewports. They're essentially a given range of attributes at which you'd expect a styling to appear. You would have things like the tablet size, the desktop size, the mobile size, and you would set an expected pixel range for those. In this case, a desktop would normally be something like 1200 pixels. A laptop might be something smaller like 1024 pixels. A tablet might be even smaller, maybe something like 76 pixels, and a phone would be very small, something maybe like 480 pixels. That way, you can have consistent styling breakpoints, which are essentially when the styling changes at any expected pixel range. You've probably also seen them in Bootstrap. They would look something more like this, with an XL, maybe an LG, a MD, and an SM. That way, people normally define rows as column with a row of XL or LG, and these are the breakpoints at which they apply. In this case, we're just going to use the variable names. So in this case, we could replace this max width of 1200 pixels and this min width of 768 pixels in here with the variable names. By using consistent variable names, we can make sure that our styling throughout our CSS always applies exactly the same, and we have consistent points at which the design of the website changes. So now that we understand the fundamentals of media queries, let's have a look at resizing this and making it a little bit smaller, more like a tablet size. When we do this, we see a few items break, such as a navigation and some of this text, which now seems to go over to another line. We can browse here to our CSS and create a media query to fix this. This will essentially make sure that the design is a little bit more responsive for this viewport. What we can do here is we can do a max width of maybe laptop size. When we do this, we can make those navigation items align horizontally instead of vertically. So we'll do display block, and this should apply and make them go down, which it has. They're also a little bit too big, so maybe we'll decrease the font size to 25 pixels. And we can see that's taken effect. That way we can make sure now that they all look consistent with the design. Now, another thing we can do is make the screen a little bit smaller. And if we do that, we can see that the fonts might be a little bit too big now. So what we could do is create another media query here for a tablet size. And for this size, we could make the font size even smaller. So that way, as you're browsing between the different sizes, you can see that the font sizes are reducing, and when they keep getting bigger, they eventually go to a vertical design once again. The next thing we can do is have a look at some of the other things that broke when we created this design. We can see here that the hero image and the feature items also don't seem to work very well. This image is now too big, and the text is also too big to fit into this container. Let's see what we can do to fix up all these other elements to make sure they're consistent with this viewport size. I'm going to jump in here and update the body to start off with. I'm going to add a new media query and kick this one off for the laptop size. Max width laptop. Here, I'll remove some of this margin and padding that I'm adding to the entire design, just so it's got a little bit more room on the width and height. Let's create another one here for the tablet size. And here, maybe we'll make the margin to 0 pixels. Great. Next, let's jump in here and have a look at the navigation, which seems fine. Next, let's have a look at the section here. If we open this up and have a look at the margin bottom, now if we have a look, we can see the margins on these are a little bit too large. So let's create a max width here of laptop size and just remove them altogether, because the sections already have some margins and I think there's too much at this viewport. Next, let's jump into the main article here for the hero image and let's see if we can redesign it a little bit. for designs on tablets, you actually want them to be a little bit bigger and maybe the font size to be a bit smaller. So we'll do this here. Let's do a add media, max width, laptop. And what we'll do is for the image, let's make it a little bit smaller. Maybe we'll make the height 150 pixels and a height of 225 pixels. And finally, let's also make the font size a little bit smaller. It was 75 before, but this time we'll do 50 pixels. That way, everything looks much better now for this tablet design. So here for the section for the main feature items, which are under article, we can see that they've got a lot of padding and the sizing isn't quite right. So let's fix that up. Do our media max width laptop again. And in here, what we'll want to do is make the font size a little bit smaller. So maybe font size 30 pixels. We'll also make it, or maybe 25 pixels. We'll also make sure that the text now is centered. And we might even have a look at reducing the height of these a little bit to maybe something like 90 pixels. And also removing the margins and maybe making them only 10 pixels. That way, all that seems to be more consistent with the design we had previously. Finally, let's have a look at these divs, which are meant to be our columns. If we take a look at them, they also have way too much margins and the font sizes are a little bit too large. Let's do media max width laptop. And let's make the font size 20 pixels. We can have the margins at 10 pixels. And I think that's even enough to keep them where they should be. The only other thing I can think of is maybe reducing the padding and maybe making it 10 pixels as well. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now if we have a look at this design, it's meeting this viewport very well. Here's an even smaller viewport. This is more like a tablet or even a mobile phone. But now we can see that everything feels a little bit more squashed in. And it's almost better for every single item now to have its own column for it to exist. And in this case, if we want to do that, we simply apply max width and we'll apply a tablet size. We'll change the flex direction of this section so that each one of the items is actually arranged as a column. This way, it's got a lot more space to breathe and looks a lot better on this viewport. We might also want to make sure that the feature items stand out a little bit more. So we can copy this viewport down here and make sure that the articles actually have a min height, which is a little bit larger. Something say like 100 pixels. If we do this and apply the styling, we can now have a nice big hero image with a few good feature items and a number of extra bits of information that were originally columns. Our responsive design is now ready. It works on all viewports, so if I was to resize it, we would immediately see how those viewports take effect as we change sizes. And I think it's great to see that responsive design has a lot of fundamentals that you can apply to make sure that the design stays consistent, doesn't matter what kind of device you're on. This is just an introduction to responsive design, and I'm going to do a couple more videos in the next few days about
Okay, so a couple of quick things before we move on. First of all, the little thing he's doing with the dollar signs, that's CIS, okay, scripting language for CSS. We haven't gotten into that yet. We will in WebDev 2, okay? So the other videos we're going to watch don't use SAS. They do, basically instead of using the little dollar sign and using a variable, they use the actual raw like pixel size or whatever. Can anybody want to guess why you might use something like that instead? What might be the big major perk about having a variable as opposed to just typing it in? Yeah, exactly. Because like if you're like me in virtually every project, I'm gonna like whenever I was working on my Flappy Bird game, I had an Excel spreadsheet open with the colors that I was using and all the hex codes in the next column because I was like, there's no way I'm going to get the same ones every time. I'm going to screw it up. So I just was copying and pasting the hex code, so I was using the same colors every time. So that's what it's for. Like I said, we will get into that, and we will implement SAS into the actual mobile app itself. But for right now, the important part of that was how media queries work. All right, now let's look at CSS media queries in 7 minutes. So the way I arranged these first 3 videos, the first one was 11 minutes, the next one is 7 minutes, and the one after that is 4 minutes. So I wanted to show you 3 different perspectives in 3 differing lengths as well. So let's hop over here and watch our buddy Kyle here explain media queries to us. Now, you may remember from Web Dev 1, the last time we had Web Dev 1 like a year ago or two, a year and a half ago. You've already seen this video, I believe, but I'm going to be willing to bet you probably have forgotten most everything in it since you haven't been using it. So let's check it out.
Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about media queries, which are absolutely essential if you want to do any form of mobile responsive design, which in today's day and age, you definitely need to account for mobile devices. So let's get started now. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream projects sooner. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. And now to get started on this video, over on the left, I just have a simple style sheet open. We have a body selector, which is changing the color of our text over here to red. And then we have a title selector on our class, which is this title element over here.
Real quick, pro tip for you. If you wanted to maybe make things easier on yourself and not have to do a bunch of work later, you might follow along with this video even. So if you wanted to maybe open up your code editor of choice and make an HTML file and a style file, you don't have to, but it just might put you a little bit ahead for the actual stuff we're going to do here in just a minute.
Here, which is just slightly larger than our subtitle element, which is just the subtitle over on the right. I also have a completely resizable window, so I can change the height and the width of our device to simulate a mobile device or a smaller screen size than a desktop device. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I'm going to be talking about mobile responsiveness, and you need to use media queries in order to deal with mobile responsiveness. And a media query, you just start with @media, and then afterwards, you need to put the type of device that you're dealing with. So this is going to be either a screen, a print device, or a speech device. So screen would be anything with a screen, for example, desktop, phone, doesn't matter. Speech would be something that's text to speech, for example, so a screen reader. And then we have print, which would be if we tried to print the page. So if I came in here and tried to print, that would be what this section is over here. And then if you want to just select all the different types, there's also the all keyword. So most of the time, you're going to be using all with your media queries. Then what you can do is you can say and, because you want to concatenate this. So you're going to say all of the screens, so any screen type, and then inside parentheses here, we need to put our actual media query selector. And one of the most common types of media queries is based on width. So we can say max width of 500 pixels, for example. Then inside of these brackets, you just need to write normal CSS code. So we can come in here and we can change the color on the body to blue. And now if we save this, what this is saying is whenever on any type of screen, whether it's a screen reader, a actual screen, printing, it doesn't matter, and we have a max width of 500 pixels. So essentially anything that's less than 500 pixels wide, and as you can see, we're at 504 pixels. So when we shrink this, you can see our text turns blue below 500, and it turns back to red above 500. And that's because what this media query is doing is whenever all of these values are true, then the code inside of it is actually run. If any of the values are false, it just ignores everything inside the media query. And now one thing that you'll notice is a lot of times you don't see this all keyword, and that's because if you remove the all at the beginning, it defaults to all. So if you want to do a media query on all different types of devices, you can just leave out the all and just put in the parentheses section, for example, max width of 500 pixels. And as you can see, that works just as before, changing our text color for us. Another thing that we can do is print specific styles. So we can say a media query for print. We can just remove this parentheses section because we just want, anytime we're printing, we want the color to be blue. Now if we save that and we go to print, you'll see that our text color is blue for printing, which is great. One thing to note about media queries is that they work just like other selectors. So if we change this here back to a max width of 500 pixels. Save that and make sure that still works. So yep, still blue below 500 and red above. If we change this body selector and we move it all the way down below our media query, you'll notice that no matter what screen size we're on, it's always going to be red text. And that's because it's reading from top to bottom, and it's always going with the bottom selector if the selectors have the same specificity. So it's going with a red color, even though this blue color is in the media query. Essentially, it just ignores it because there's another selector after it. Now let's move that body selector all the way back to the top so we can have actual working code. And if we save that, you can see that it's now working again. We have our blue text and our red text. Another thing that we can do is inside of our media, we can actually deal with the orientation of our device. So we can say orientation, and we want to do, for example, landscape. So whenever we're in landscape mode, essentially horizontal mode, what we want to do is we want to change our title to have, for example, a color of, we'll go with green. So now, as you can see, we're not in landscape mode, we're in portrait mode, and our text is normal. And as soon as we go into landscape mode, essentially whenever our width becomes wider than our height, as you can see here, our text color has changed to green to match that orientation of landscape. We can also do a very similar thing, but we can do portrait instead. And in this one, we'll just change our subtitle to be cyan. And now, as you can see, when we go into portrait mode, our subtitle changes to cyan. And in orientation mode, you can see our title is green. We can even go as far as to combine these together. So for example, we can say when we're in landscape mode and when our max width is going to be 500 pixels. So now, as you can see, we are in landscape mode, but our width is above 500 pixels. As soon as we drop it below that, you can see that we've changed to that green text. And then once we leave landscape mode, you can see it goes back to blue. So we have to both be in landscape mode and be less than 500 pixels wide because we're able to concatenate these with the AND keyword. If you wanted to do an OR statement instead of AND, what you could do is just put a comma instead of the keyword AND. And now what this is saying is anytime we're under 500 pixels or in landscape mode, it's going to be green. So as you can see, we are not in landscape mode anymore, but our width is less than 500 pixels, so it's green. And as we increase that above 500, now we're no longer in landscape mode and no longer less than 500 pixels wide, so it's going to be red. But as soon as we enter landscape mode, even though we're not less than 500 pixels, it's going to turn into green. So you remember comma is going to be for an OR, and AND is going to be for AND. Now there are quite a few different selectors that you can use with media queries, but really the main ones that you're going to mess with is going to be orientation, print, and max or min width. And min width is obviously just going to be the opposite of max width. So as you can see, we're over 500 pixels wide and we're in landscape mode. So it's going to be a title of green. And as soon as we leave that landscape mode or we become less than 500 pixels wide, it's obviously no longer going to work. And that's all there is to responsive design with media queries. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my other videos, which are going to be linked.
Okay, a couple quick things. So, comma is OR, and is AND. The reason I wrote monorail up there is because it reminds me of that Simpsons episode where they're like, let's discuss what a monorail is. Mono means one. It's like mono equals one, rail equals rail. So, comma is OR, and is AND, right? The really neat thing about the media queries is that it does everything on the fly. Okay, did you see how as he was resizing that, it just instantly changed? There wasn't any sort of like jerky jump or anything like that. It just did what it was supposed to do. Now imagine if you loaded it up on an iPhone, right? It's not going to look all weird and then snap to the right thing, right? It's just going to load up looking correct. As far as we're concerned, at least, it happens instantaneously. It happens on the fly. So we want to be considering the different sizes, so phones, tablets, and then everything else, right? Laptops and that kind of thing. But we also want to be considering landscape versus portrait mode, because portrait's going to give us a lot more horizontal space to work with. Portrait's going to give us a lot more vertical space to work with. So something to consider. Now, something neither of them have mentioned so far, well, I guess he did at the beginning of his video, kind of alluded to it a little. But we haven't talked about EMs versus pixels, right? So most of the time you see fonts done in pixels. Typically that's fine. What might be the big issue with doing fonts sizes in pixels as it applies to responsive design? Anybody see the immediate flaw with that?
It's fixed in size.
Yeah, it's a fixed size. So even though 25 pixels, let's say, might look good on pretty much every screen, on an iPhone, 25 pixels is going to be enormous. It's going to be massively huge, right? So what you do in that case is you use EMs, which are relative, right? Relative to the size of whatever 12-point font is on that particular device. So I'm sorry, what the default font is on that particular device. So if my base font is 12, which it is on most computers, then one EM is equal to 12 point or 12 point font, right? Whereas two EMs would be 24 point and so on and so forth. And so on an iPhone, your default font size is probably a 10, maybe. I would say max, probably a 9 or a 10. It probably isn't very big. We could look it up, but it's probably not a very large size. So you would want to make sure that, like, okay, if I want this to be big, I want it to be 3 or 4 EMs, and if I want it to be a regular size, I want it to be 1 EM, right? Okay, so now that we've seen that, let's watch one more media queries. This one is less than 5 minutes. So let's watch this one here real quick, and then we'll talk about Flex just a little bit. Flexbox, which we talked about in WebDev 1 a little, but again, that's been a while ago, so won't hurt to do a bit of a refresher on it.
Hi there, my name's Kevin, and here on my channel we learn how to code the web and how to make it look good while we're at it. Today I'm going to give you a rundown on how media queries work, and we're going to do it in less than 5 minutes. Now this is part of a new series that I'm starting up where I'm going to be looking at different important concepts and giving you guys a rundown on how they work in under 5 minutes, little coding quickies, because you know not everyone has time to watch a 25-minute long video all the time. Now if you like this idea, like the video so that I know that you like it, and if you have any topic ideas and things you'd like to see me do in less than 5 minutes, leave them in the comments below, but let's stop wasting so much time and let's get to this. If you're here, you probably know that a website needs to be responsive today, so instead of worrying about why, let's just jump right into the how. Now media queries are used either to create new CSS rules or more often to overwrite existing CSS rules, and in general, you already have some CSS like I do right now on the screen, and we want to modify that at different screen sizes. So with this page that I have on the screen now, it's nice and simple, just threw it together, and I think it looks pretty good on mobile. But as the screen gets bigger, there's a few changes that I want to make. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come all the way down to here, and media queries always start with an @media, and then they have a parentheses, and then they have the curly braces. Just write this every single time so you don't forget anything, and then you go back into it and fill it out. So inside the parentheses here is one of the places where we can write a rule. So in here I'm going to write min width of 600 pixels. So currently my paragraphs have a font size of 1 rem, and I want that to be bigger as my screen size increases. So let's do just that. All we need to do is write our new rule inside of the little squiggly braces here. So I'm inside of those, I'm going to put my paragraph, and I'm going to just write normal CSS. So my paragraph will now have a font size of 1.25 rem. Save that, and there we go. So now I can see that it's smaller, and then when it gets bigger, it gets bigger. So as soon as I cross that threshold, it gets bigger. And of course, I can keep doing that. So on top of that, I can add another @media, do that, put all my things there, and go back inside of there, and we're going to do a min width of 800 pixels, and we will do a paragraph, font size of 1.5 rem, and in this case, let's also go and throw a line height in there of 1.5. So now when I get to 800 pixels, we can see the font size jumps, and my line height is also adjusting at the same time. Now remember, with CSS, the last rule always wins. So let's say I have 2 rules here to define the background of my site. Right now purple's on top, so my site says white. But if I copy that purple one, or I cut it, and I move it down below here, and I save, it goes to purple. The white gets overwritten, and my purple wins. So we don't actually want a purple background, but the same applies to media queries. You want to always make sure your media query comes after what you're trying to overwrite. So if this paragraph was all the way down here, my media queries are going to do nothing because it's changing at this screen size, it's changing in that, and then this one is changing it everywhere, and there's no point in having any media queries. So just make sure you put your original selector first, then you do your media queries after that, or you might see that nothing's actually happening. Now, other than min width, we also have max width. So if you're doing things the trendy way, you know, the mobile first way, like I've been doing in this video, well then we're starting at a small screen size, we're getting bigger and bigger, so we're adding rules as we increase the size of it. We're going with min width like I was just doing. But if you've designed your site for desktop computers and you're working your way down, in that case you'd want to be using max width instead of min width, and it works exactly the same way. Other things that you can use, other than focusing on width, well, you can focus on the orientation of the screen, you know, portrait or landscape, and you can even, you know, say if you want your CSS to work for a screen or if you want it to be working for when someone's printing off your page. So I hope you liked this video, and if you want some more information on media queries with a bit more
Like I said, very quick, simple explanation. I really like that one. I feel like that one's one of the most useful videos it's the most useful video of the three. Now we need to start with max width because we designed for desktop first, right? And so we need to start with that, and then work our way down to all the different smaller screens. Now, the last thing we're going to watch is Flexbox. Okay. Now, when you chain this together with Grid, you don't have to use them both. But I personally feel that using media queries, Flexbox, and Grid is the easiest way to make the most responsive site possible. Or for our use case here, the most responsive mobile app possible. Which is to say that we can easily now run, or easily build a program that runs everywhere. Not just a mobile app, but something that can run write once, run anywhere, just like Java, right? So let's watch this Flexbox video, and then we will break out into you can do teams of two if you want to. Everyone needs to turn in their own copy, but you can do teams of two on this project if you want to. And we'll break out into those teams or into our solo selves here just momentarily.
Hey guys, welcome to a quick crash course on CSS Flexbox. So many of you probably know what Flexbox is, and that's fine. This will help you brush up on your skills a little bit, but this video is more for beginners that know CSS but want to get into using Flexbox in their projects. I did get a request for this, and I figured it'd be something a bit different, a nice break from the JavaScript and PHP videos. Alright, so before we begin, I just want to mention my website, traversymedia.com. Provides an easy, it's basically, alright, so check that out. Alright, so what the hell is Flexbox? It's also called the Flexible Box model. It's basically a layout mode or model that provides an easy and clean way to arrange items within a container. So if you've used CSS for a while, you've probably been using the old block model where you assign widths, whether it's a percentage or a fixed width, and then you use floats to arrange items on the page. If you want, for instance, 3 boxes in a row, and then you'd have to factor in your margins and your padding, and you'd have to do all types of math to figure out how much margin, how much width you should have, and it can be kind of a pain in the ass. So Flexbox has basically taken care of all of this. There's no floats at all. It's responsive and mobile friendly. Okay, and it looks good on smaller screens. And of course, you can use media queries to make that work even better. Positioning child elements is much easier. And Flex containers, their margins don't collapse with the margins of their contents. And then another great feature is that if you want to change the order of the elements, okay, so for instance, if you have a main column and then a sidebar and another sidebar, if you want to change the order of that, you don't have to edit the HTML. You don't have to move the first sidebar over to the other side if you want the main column in the middle. All right, you can simply assign an order property. And we'll get into all of this as we move along. All right, so some of the concepts of the flexible box model is the ability to alter item width and height to best fit in its container's available free space. Flexbox is also direction agnostic. All right, and this is different than the block model, which is vertically biased, and then the inline, which is horizontally biased. Flexbox works well for both. Alright, Flexbox was created for small scale layouts, and there's another standard called Grids, which is geared more towards larger scale stuff. This will work similar to the way that Twitter Bootstrap grid system works. Alright, but that's for another video. So this is a quick diagram of how Flexbox looks. Basically, we have a main container wrapper, alright, the Flex container, and this is the element that we assign the display property. We assign display flex. And then inside that we have child elements or flex items. So there's certain properties that go on the container and certain ones that go on the items themselves. There's also an X and Y axis, or in Flexbox it's called the main and the cross axis, and we can use certain alignment properties to position items here and to change directions and vertically and horizontally align, all kinds of stuff. Alright, but it's kind of hard to explain just talking and showing you a diagram, so we will get into the code and I'll show you how it works. So here are the main flex properties. Okay, so we have display flex. Okay, you can also do inline flex. This goes on that container element. We can assign the direction, so flex direction row, which would be horizontally, or we could do column, which would assign it vertically. Flex wrap, so we can define if we want the elements to wrap or not. So if we make the browser windows smaller, should they go down to the next line or not. Flex basis is basically the same as width. Okay, you can assign a width to each of your flex items. Justify content. Okay, so this basically, if we want it to align to the left, we can say flex start. The right would be flex end. We can also do center. And then we have a bunch of other alignments to align self. This basically allows the default alignment to be overridden for individual flex items. We also have align items. This is the behavior for how the flex items are laid out along the cross axis. And then we have align content, which aligns on the cross axis. Now flex grow and flex shrink, basically we can make different elements in the row different sizes. So we may want a main column that takes up, let's say, 3 spaces, and then 2 smaller sidebars to take up 1. And flex is basically both of these put together. But we'll get into that as we move along. We also have order, so we can change the order of elements without actually having to change the HTML. Alright, so enough of these slides. Let's go ahead and jump into some code and I'll show you how this works. Alright, so what I have here, guys, I have the scratchpad.io console where we can edit our HTML and CSS, and this will live reload. And what we have is, if we look at the HTML, we have a div with the class of container1, and that's wrapped around 3 other divs with the class of box1, box2, and box3. And they all have just an H3 and a paragraph. Alright, and then up here, if we look, we have our styles. We have the container1, which doesn't have any styles in it. Container1 div, I did this just so that we can have a border and some padding around each one of these boxes. And then we have some empty, our box1, box2, and box3. Now, let's say that we want these to be side by side and take up the whole width. So all we have to do is go to the container element and say display flex, and you can see that it just automatically puts them side by side. We didn't have to put in any floats or anything like that, and that may be very well what the only thing that you want to do, and that's fine. But let's go in a little further and let's assign flex, we'll say flex1, and we're going to assign flex1 to all 3 of these elements. Alright, and that basically gives us the same thing. We have 3 even boxes. Now, if we want to, let's say, take box 1 and make that the main column, make that a little wider, what we could do is change that to flex 2. Alright, you can see that it pushed these 2 over, and this is now larger. We could go and flex 3, flex 4, and so on. Actually, I think when we get to a certain length, a certain width, it just stops. But let's keep it at flex 2. Alright, now if we wanted to take box 3 and say flex 2, we could do that as well. But what I want to do is now show you how we can change the order of these. Let's say that we want this to be the main column and we want that in the middle of the two sidebars. So all we would have to do is say box 1 will say order 2, and 2, let's say order 1, and then 3 will say order 3. So now you can see box 1 is in the middle because we assigned order 2. Okay, 2 is in 1 and 3 is in 3. Now notice that by default these are all the same height, even though that this box 1, the text is ending up here. These are still all the same height, and that's by default. Now if we want to set these to, let's say, align to the top without, without the automatic height, then we could go to our container and let's say we can say align items, and let's set it to flex dash start. Alright, now you can see that box 1 is shorter because it has less content. If we want to go the other way and put it towards the bottom, we could say flex end, and that would move it down. Alright, and I'm actually going to leave these. I'm just going to comment them out just so you guys can have this for future reference. Okay, so that'll be end, and I'm just going to wrap this in a comment. Alright, we can also do center. So if we were to say align items center, you can see that that moves it to the center. Alright, by default it's actually stretch. Okay, that's the default. Alright, let me just move this up here. Okay, so that's align items. Now if you want to change the direction to go vertically instead of horizontally, horizontally is a row, vertically is a column, we could add flex direction and set that to col, or a column, and you can see it goes back to being a column. Alright, but we do want a row, so I'm going to just put that in there. Now this is all well and good, but what if you want to have, for one, you want to have margins, and you also want to specify the widths. Alright, because right now we don't have any width specified. So what I'm going to do is go down here and go under our container 1, and I'm going to just paste this in. Alright, so you can see we have a div with container 2. Let me just fix this. So container 2, and then each div inside has a class of container 2 box. They're all the same. For what I want to show you, I don't need to have them with different class names. Alright, and then let's just go ahead and add our borders and stuff to that by just saying container 2 div. Alright, so what I want to do now is take the container 2 box. Remember, that pertains to all 3 of these boxes. They all have the same class. Alright, so let's go up here and just put that in there. And let's set a width, and we'll set that to 30%. Okay, so you can now see that the boxes are 30% wide. Now they're not side by side because we haven't attached them to a Flexbox yet. So what we need to do is, just like we did with container 1 up here, let's go ahead and put container 2, and we're going to set display to flex. Okay, that puts them side by side. And notice that, well, I guess you can't really notice it here. Let me make these a little, let's say 20. Alright, so now we have 20% for each box, but it leaves all this room on the side here. Now, if we want to basically put margin in the middle of this so that this can spread all the way across and also have margins in the middle, then what we can do is go up to our container 2 and we can use justify content. Now by default it's going to be flex start. Okay, notice that that didn't change anything. I'm going to actually keep this stuff in a comment. So let me just comment that out for you. Alright, so flex start. Now let's say we want it aligned over here. We could say flex end. Okay, that pushes it over. Let's copy that, put that up here. Now what I would want to do in this situation is actually, let's see, if we do center, that puts it in the center. Okay, but we want margins in the middle, so we want to set it to space between. Okay, and you can see that that puts the margins in the middle. Alright, and I'm going to actually change that to, let's say, 25 or 27. Alright, we also can do space around. Now notice with space between, there's nothing on the sides. There's no margin on the side. It's flush. But if we say space around, that's going to also add some margins on the side. Alright, but I'm going to keep it at space between. Oh, I didn't mean to save it. Now using width is fine. It does work, but if you want to make it more, I guess, flexy, then you want to use flex basis. Okay, which does the same exact thing, it's just a more flexbox way to do it. Okay, rather than width, use flex basis. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just release this full screen mode here, and I'm going to drag this. Oh, you know what? It's not. This isn't a good platform to give you this example. Oh yeah, it is. I can just go like that. So as I make this smaller, let's say we're looking at this on a smartphone or a tablet, these columns are way too small. We don't want to have a 3-column layout when you're on a smartphone. So to fix this, what we can do is just use a simple media query around our containers. So up here at the top, let's say media. I don't like this editor. So media, and let's say min width, and we'll set this to, let's say 768 pixels. Alright, and what we want to do is take the container 1 and 2 and cut that, and let's put that in there. Alright, now when we're at a certain width, now this is zoomed in, so this looks like it's a lot more than 768 pixels wide, but it's not if I actually zoom out. Yeah, that's about right. So when we get to a certain point, our columns go away. Okay, so on a mobile device it would look more like this. Alright, so that's an easy solution to basically make this responsive. Let me just make this bigger again. Alright. For the time being, I'm going to change this to, let's say, 468. So what about wrapping? Okay, we want to have the option to make our elements wrap. So what I'm going to do is paste in another set down here. This is going to be container 3, and notice I have 6 boxes in here. I'm just going to add the border around them too. So right here, let's say container 3 div. Alright, and then what we'll do is go right here and say container 3 box. Okay, they all have the same class. And let's set the width, or the flex basis. Okay, so we'll set that to 15%, and let's make sure we add the display flex. I'm not going to put it in the media query, this one. So container 3 display flex. Alright, so now we have these boxes side by side, and I want them to wrap, so I'm going to go to the container 3, and we're just going to set flex dash wrap, and we're going to set that to wrap. And now you can see that at a certain point, this one gets pushed down there. Alright, and if I were to make this smaller, you can see that it's going to wrap up until the point where we actually have two rows of 3 boxes. Alright, so that's wrap, and I'd probably want to set that width to, let's see, let's set it to 10 or 12, yeah. Alright. And then we may want to add, let's see, space between, justify content for that as well. Alright, so that's the gist of Flexbox. Hopefully it helps some of you guys out. I will make this code available on my website, traversymedia.com, so that you guys can kind of use it as a reference when you want to use it in your projects. But yeah, so if you like this video, please subscribe, leave
You would think eventually we would get to a day where people don't have to say like the video and subscribe. We would just know to do that, right? Okay, so one quick point on what he said about having the source code available. As I said yesterday, to underscore what he just said, the code he provides is used as a reference. I don't intend for you to copy and paste and then just make a couple of tweaks to it and call it good. That teaches you absolutely nothing. Additionally, that's not what you're going to do in the actual workplace. Additionally, typically it's considered bad form to be not paying attention to the thing that is supposed to be being paid attention to. And specifically, it is a bad idea to do that because you're playing a game or because you're on your phone or something like that. So just as a professional note to everybody, just bear in mind that you should focus on the task and the thing at hand. I have usually a meeting a week, typically more than that. And I'm not allowed to just sit there and twiddle my thumbs and play on my phone and stuff like that. I have to actually pay attention to what's going on. So just a little professional courtesy from one person to another. So what is it? Why would I show you a video yesterday on how to do grid and then show you a video today on how to do Flexbox? Anybody want to guess why I would show you two different things like that are effectively the same thing? Any idea? Yeah.
Just have like different options.
Yes, that's part of it, and that's great. As you know, I'm a proponent of being able to have as many tools in your toolbox as possible. Any other thoughts as to why I might show you two fairly similar but different ways of doing something? Any ideas?
I mean, some people learn different, like using different platforms.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that could also be a way to do it, or a reason for it. Absolutely. The biggest reason, at least in my opinion, the biggest reason is your use case, right? So in the case of the calculator, right, he used a grid. And it made a lot of sense to do that because it's literally a grid, right? Like a calculator is literally laid out like a grid. There is a space that represents the screen. There is a smaller, more subdivided grid below it that represents all the buttons, right? And then those pieces of the grid are contained in an overall container, which is the actual calculator itself. Yes, sir?
Ryan said he put something in the chat. Just next to it.
Okay, let me check that real quick then. They always say like and subscribe.
They have to.
Yeah, it's a rule. Turn the volume up. I mean, according to mine, the volume is at like almost a yellow. So, so just let him know if you wouldn't mind that I've got the volume up to like a normal level. He should be able to crank up his own. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, so the biggest reason is based on your use case, right? In the case from a second ago, it's literally a grid. Flexbox is more intended as a main layout, right? So the RPG game thing that we made in JavaScript, right? That was not built on a grid system, right? You could have, but they didn't. And it makes sense not to use a grid there because, I mean, it's not really laid out like a grid. You just kind of put things where they go, right? So when you get to So when you're doing that one, when you're making that one mobile ready and responsive, you'll probably want to incorporate Flex into it, right? As far as the calculator goes, it's laid out in a grid. You can probably just use a simple media query, right? That's all you would really need is just a simple media query for it. Whereas the RPG is going to take a combination of Flexbox probably and a media query similar to what he was demonstrating, right? You also want to consider landscape versus portrait, because if someone flips their phone into portrait mode, you don't want the web page to say the same, right? You want it to respond. Maybe you want to disallow landscape, right? That's possible. Maybe look into that. Okay, so that's what I've got for you as far as information and content. Are there any questions, concerns, comments, thoughts, or ideas? No? Okay. Come back at 12:35 and we will start working on getting our two HTML projects mobile ready so we can start practicing that for when we make our actual mobile app mobile.